British policy increasingly frustrates George Washington. It is an obstacle on his path towards prosperity as a planter and land speculator. In the fall of 1770, Washington visits his land surveyor, who has lined up some choice parcels in the Ohio country. His journey takes him back to the places where he had once fought for the British Empire. Near the forks of the Ohio, where he had barely survived the first real battle of the war at Fort Necessity. As a reward for their service in the French and Indian War, colonial soldiers were promised land. Colonials had been fighting for access to the continent's vast interior. After all, that's what they thought the war was all about. And now the king has declared the very land they are settling is off limits, reserved for Indians. Washington is here today to reap his reward. But because the Royal Proclamation of 1763 preserves the West for the Indians, he knows he can't take possession. Yet. Like many people, he believes it won't be long before he can. It was 20 years before that Washington had first been dispatched to secure this territory for the British Empire. His guide on that journey was the Seneca chief Gayasuta. It's ironic that they would meet again now as Washington seeks to acquire the land for himself. The Seneca chief seems pleased to see Washington again.
In the person of Gayasuta, I found an old acquaintance, he being one of the Indians that went with me to the French in 1753. He expressed satisfaction in seeing me. He thanked me for saying that peace and friendship was the wish of my people, and again expressed his people's desire and their friendly disposition to the white people.
Despite their friendliness, Gayasuta knows that Washington is not here merely to pay a social call, but to acquire land. It is only British policy that's holding Washington back, just as British policies are angering colonists elsewhere. In New England, a clash of expectations leads to mounting tension. British rule is seen as heavy-handed. A riot ends when redcoats kill 5 in what colonists call the Boston Massacre. They see Britain as riding roughshod over the rights of colonial assemblies. Radicals increasingly assert the right of self-rule. The Crown floods Boston with troops and rewrites the colony's charter. Moderates like Washington find these developments disturbing. When he and his colleagues express solidarity with Boston, the royal governor dissolves Virginia's legislature.
For my part, I shall not undertake to say where the line between Great Britain and the colonies should be drawn, but I am clearly of the opinion that one ought to be drawn, and our rights clearly ascertained. The crisis is upon us, and our rights must be asserted.
And yet, even at this moment of crisis, colonists like Washington have no interest in breaking away from the empire. This portrait shows Washington wearing a gorget, the mark of a British officer. It affirms his allegiance to the crown. In September 1774, at the First Continental Congress, Washington and other colonial representatives call for a coordinated effort to resist British actions. Relations with Britain continue to deteriorate, and Washington is drawn further into the fray. Americans prepare to defend what they see as their rights, by force of arms if necessary. A Second Continental Congress is convened. Washington no longer aspires to be a British gentleman. He used to order his suits cut to the latest styles in London. To this Congress, he wears the uniform he designed for Virginia's new militia. It has been 20 years since the young, naive colonel set off into the backcountry to join a battle sparking an epic struggle. Now he anticipates a new battle. The Second Continental Congress must organize a war and decide who will lead it.
Washington! Welcome!
Some take Washington's uniform as a statement that he is prepared to lead the colonial forces.
Resolved that a general be appointed. George Washington, Esquire, is unanimously elected.
In April 1775, fighting erupts in Massachusetts between colonial and British forces. This is no longer a dispute between loyal members of the empire. Once blood has been shed, there's no going back. That same month, at the forks of the Ohio, the heart of events for the past 23 years, colonial representatives meet with Gayasuta. He tries to assert Indian dominion over the land.
We will not suffer, either the English or Americans, to march an army through our country. I am appointed by the Six Nations to take care of this country. And I will.
And he tries. To maintain the independence of his people, Gayasuta needs a powerful ally. But the French are gone forever, and the British would abandon the Indians to their fate. Under President Washington, Americans forced the Indians off the lands that Gayasuta vowed to defend. In 1754, no one in America imagined that a backwoods territorial dispute would end up transforming the world. But the French and Indian War did just that. By eliminating France's empire in North America, by allowing British leaders to believe they could exercise power without restraint, by convincing colonists they had no choice but to resist that power, even to the point of revolution, and by depriving Indian people of the allies needed to help protect their land and their autonomy. No one expected any of this to happen, but by changing the face of the continent, the French and Indian War became the war that made America.